here are also more ambiguous cases. Some of what used to be called social philosophy, as in social and political philosophy, part of that's now called sociology, but not all of it. It was essentially the agreed parts, pursuable by agreed techniques, that became the science of sociology. The controversial parts, especially about social values, those remained as part of philosophy. Much the same happened with philosophy of language. Some of that became linguistics, a science in its own right, but there are plenty of questions that remain. It was only the easy and systematizable questions that became the science of linguistics. The story is essentially the same in that part of philosophy called philosophy of mind. William James taught philosophy at Harvard from the 1880s to 1907, and he's of course known as a proponent of philosophical pragmatism. But it was through his influence that parts of philosophy of mind started to be seen as developed enough to count as a science, the science of psychology. James once said, "The first lecture in psychology that I ever heard was when I delivered." William James published The Principles of Psychology in 2 volumes in 1890. It still reads as half philosophy, half psychology. A publisher convinced William James to create a shorter book to use as a classroom text, which came out as Psychology, the Briefer Course. The original longer book became known as The James. The briefer course became known as the Jimmy. That was the birth of psychology. About the same time in Europe, the break between the philosophy of mind and what was conceived of as the science of mind took the form of psychoanalysis. Freud's first book on aphasia was published in 1891. The term psychoanalysis was coined in 1896. And later, with somewhat different histories, neurophysiology and neuropsychology became established as sciences. The story throughout is the same. The easier stuff becomes the science, the stuff that's more readily systematized and that yields to experimental technique. The harder stuff is the questions that are not only unanswered, but that we're not even sure how to answer. Those are the fundamentally controversial bits, areas in which we're not even sure what basic theory should look like. Those are the areas in which we don't yet even quite know what we don't know. All of that remains part of philosophy. That's the philosophy of mind.